I was diagnosed with a condition called MRKH, which is Mayer-Rokitansky-Kuster-Hauser syndrome, which is a very long and lengthy name for something that doesn't actually explain what it is. But the condition essentially means that you are born without a womb. It's a syndrome. So the reason I found out about it in my late teens was because I hadn't started my period. So there was a process of going through those various checks to see what was causing that. That process actually, for me, didn't take as long as it does for others who have this condition. And being told at 17 that you can't have children yourself is quite, it's really difficult to kind of get a grip on how to deal with that. And I found that quite hard. I still have ovaries, so I still have normal hormones like every other woman, and everything like externally looks exactly the same because the hormones and everything and the way the body develops is the same, apart from just not having the uterus part. It was really difficult because I kind of, at the time, I remember I was in a hospital room. They'd diagnosed it via laparoscopy. So I'd been in a day clinic, and my mum was there as well. And I remember the doctor coming in and explaining. He said at the time he didn't know for certain it was MRKH, but he was pretty sure that's what it was, and he described what he'd found. It just didn't really hit me. I remember my mum crying, which I think was probably the only time she cried about it that I at least saw. It was just weird. It took probably maybe a month or two for it all to sink in before I kind of thought, the kind of implication of that is quite high. And at the age of 17, you just don't really expect to be dealing with that. And I kind of it probably took me a couple of months before it hit me enough to be upset about it and to think, oh God, how am I going to deal with this? I always had thoughts, at least, of that I'd have a family, and that these ideals of how I expected my life to be, and I was like, well, that's just like shattered. I don't know what's going to happen now. I think I was 28 at the time. We decided that we'd at least see what the fertility was like, see if it was viable, and then we'd see whether we could get any funding. And if we couldn't, then we'd kind of sit back and reassess and work out what to do. I've always wanted to have a family, and when you know that there's a problem, it makes it even more kind of heightened that you kind of want to do something about it. So I think it's always on my mind. It's not something I ever kind of stop thinking about. We were considered a condition that was rare enough but not rare enough, and if they did it for us, then they'd have to do it for everyone else. It just became a bit of a mockery, really. And it was just it got to the end of that time, and my by this point my partner and I we just completely stopped communicating about it, because I don't think we just didn't really know how to talk about it, and we got very disconnected from each other. It ultimately was the end of our relationship. Everyone is different. Even people who have MRKH or other conditions, it will affect them in different ways, and just because someone has something that's not visible doesn't mean it's not a big deal to them. I think it's just being a bit more supportive of people, but in a way that isn't seen as being patronising or pity. I hate I used to hate talking about it with other women because I always felt like they were pitying me, and that wasn't the reason for telling them. It was that I was telling them because they were my friends or family or whatever. And I think it's just that there's only so much you're ever going to be able to understand if you don't have it. But I think taking the time to listen to people's stories and their experiences that they've had in their lives, I think it can just give different perspective to, in some cases, how lucky those people might be in terms of the process that they've had, or also they might find things in their lives that strike a chord with experiences that you've had as well. And I write a blog, and I found that writing my thoughts and feelings and my experiences of having having this condition have really helped engage not only with my parents, where we never used to talk about this, but also with other friends who did or didn't know, but have also found how some of the experiences that I've had or emotions I've had in reaction to something are very similar to things that could be for a completely different cause, but they've been able to relate to those feelings, and whether it's feeling alone or just waking up one day and just really wanting to curl up into a ball and go back to sleep. But I think it's trying to be a bit more aware of people, and I think we can all be a bit too kind of blinkered in terms of our viewpoints on things without necessarily knowing or maybe even wanting to understand the full story.